Welcome to this campaign 2022 Senate primary debate. I'm political specialist Sean Boyd here with my colleague Jesse Paul, political reporter for the Colorado Sun. Well, the primary election is just 1 week away. It will determine which Republican takes on Democratic incumbent Michael Bennet in November. Bennet is running for his third term after being appointed to the seat in 2009. Prior to entering politics, he worked as an attorney, investment manager, and superintendent of Denver Public Schools. In 2020, he ran for president, dropping out after a poor showing in the New Hampshire primary. Now let's meet the two Republicans hoping to take his job. Ron Hanks is a first-term state representative from Fremont County. He served 32 years in the military and has worked in the oil and gas industry. Joe Day is a first-time candidate and construction company owner who was born and raised in Denver and currently lives in Greenwood Village. I want to thank you both for being here. This is the first time that you two will go head-to-head in a debate that is hosted by nonpartisan media outlets. A few housekeeping items before we get started. The debate is an hour long. Candidates will have 2 minutes to answer each question, then a 30-second rebuttal. They did not receive questions in advance, and we did flip a coin to determine who has the first word and who has the last word. I want to start with an issue that polling shows is the top issue for voters: inflation. You both criticized Democrats on this, but as a U.S. Senator, what would you do specifically to combat inflation, and not just gas prices? And I want to add, not expanding the deficit will slow inflation, but what I'm asking is how you would bring down consumer costs right away. And Mr. O'Day, we're going to start with you.
Sure. Well, I'd take a three-pronged approach. The first thing we've got to do is we've got to end this frivolous spending that's been going on from Washington for far too long. We got big government throwing a lot of money into our economy. The $1.9 trillion that the Democrats ran for COVID relief here this last, a year ago, March, that any of that money that's not yet into our system, we should not finish spending. Let's quit spending. It's very critical. The next thing we've got to do is, I think Rand Paul's on the right track when he starts talking about the oversight for the Federal Reserve. They were asleep at the wheel. The guys that are in there, if they were working for my company, I'd fire them. We don't need people asleep at the wheel in such a job that needs such great care. So we need more oversight on the Federal Reserve. They need to do their job. They should have been there a year ago. And the last thing we need to do is make sure that we get the oil and gas spigot turned back on here in the United States. That's one of the very fastest things we can do to return the price of gasoline to just 2 years ago under Trump. We were down under $2. This policy of killing off the supply and not changing the demand, that's pushing the price up. You flood the market with more product, the price will go down. Those are things that the Senate should take on right now. And as your senator, those are things that I'll chase and make sure we have some success in Washington, D.C.
I want to know what you would do specifically as a U.S. Senator to bring down consumer costs right away.
Right. Well, the first thing is oil and gas, whether you wanted it to be or not. Our gas prices are driving the cost of inflation. The cost of diesel affects every single thing that American families need for food and for supplies. It has gone up to $6 a gallon. It's at $7.50 a gallon on the coasts where we're bringing our supplies in from China. And that's part two. First, let's get the energy started again in the United States. We had energy independence. We can have it again in a matter of months. I fracked with Blue Collar America, and it's a simple project, a simple process. The second problem is manufacturing. We have too much of it coming from overseas. It is at the mercy and the whim of foreign governments, and if we made it back in the United States, the supply chain is much more constant, which would reduce the costs of goods as they're being, whether there's supply or no supply, that is inflationary.
Do you have any rebuttal, Mr. O'Day?
No, I think Ron's on point here with manufacturing and bringing that back onto U.S. soil. But again, the problem is big government in the way. That's the problem. We need to shrink this government to get them out of our way so our businesses can begin to flourish again. People saw it just 2 years ago. My business was growing under the Trump administration. And we need to restore that kind of confidence in our systems. And the only way you do that is turn some of these policies over.
lot of people have concerns about the cost of food. How would these policies bring down that cost of food?
Well, everything is delivered in a truck. Everything in the United States, in some form or fashion, goes through a truck. And when my company's paying $6.50, $7 for diesel, guess what? That's getting passed on to the consumer at every level. This fuel thing is causing this inflation, and we need to get ahead of it.
What I would say is I agree that the federal government is spending too much outside of our budget, which is not very well regulated with these omnibus spending bills and these continuing resolutions. Both of those must stop. The $1.9 trillion effort by Biden ought to be stopped. Joe, I might suggest the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that you said you supported is also inflationary, and that ought to be stopped as well. We need to work within a very constrained federal budget.
I'm going to give you a chance to just answer
Sure.
that.
Well, I believe in a small, efficient government. I believe we need law and order. That's one of the primary things we need out of our government. The second one is military, and the third one is infrastructure. The tunnel at the top of the hill here on the Continental Divide is called the Eisenhower Tunnel. Republicans have been behind good infrastructure bills for quite a long time, and I'll continue to support that. We can't turn our house over to our kids with a leaking roof. We've got to start rebuilding America, and I'll stand by my decision there.
Jesse?
So are we doing rebuttals on rebuttals, or how is this working?
We'll move on. We'll bring up infrastructure.
We're going to bring
Okay.
back infrastructure.
Just so you
Yep.
know, he rebutted, and then I rebutted, and then he rebutted. So if that's the way we want to do
I'll
this.
give you a quick.
Well, all I wanted to say is we already have a transportation budget. And so the $1.2 trillion Biden infrastructure bill is on top of that. It's inflationary. It is very little of it goes to infrastructure. It's a bad bill, and it's $1.2 trillion. That's too much money in a government that's already out of control.
I just
Jesse?
want to correct that, Jesse, that the $1.2 trillion is not all inflationary spending. Over 3/4 of that money is from the HUTF fund. That's the tax dollars that were collected at the pump that are destined to go into our transportation system. You might want to read the bill.
All right, let's move on, gentlemen. Okay, so
It's already in the other budget. So here
our
we
next
go.
topic is
Here we go.
abortion here.
Let's
So
do
on
it.
this issue, I do have a separate question for
Okay.
either of you, and Mr. Hanks, Representative Hanks, let's start with you.
All right.
You say that abortion should be banned without exceptions, but when you ran for Congress into California in 2010, you said that there should be some exceptions, including when the life of a mother is at risk. Can you
Right.
talk about why you changed your position?
Yeah, there's been a lot of misrepresentations, Jesse. I appreciate the question. A lot of misrepresentations about what was my 2010 record and why I ran. And I'd invite everybody to go to hanks4colorado.com and look at the truth and facts side of the website. In 2010, I ran against Obamacare being pushed through. I took a year off my military service because Obamacare was being jammed down the American people's throat. And we had a lapdog of Nancy Pelosi that was pushing it. I had a chance to fight him. The abortion issue in 2010 is a little bit different in that the science and medical ability of the United States and doctors is much more advanced now. So we don't have to. What I said back then, by the way, was I would leave a small and narrow window for medical experts to make decisions on what is the life of the mother. We are finding much better technology and capability to keep infants, babies alive at earlier and earlier periods. So that window is narrowing. We are using abortion as a contraception issue and process, and that's completely abhorrent, and it's murder.
So medical experts, let me ask a follow-up. Medical experts
Sure.
do say that there are a number of different conditions where an abortion could save a mother's life, whether it's infection, preeclampsia, placental abruption, and the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists is among those experts. Do you disagree with their position on that?
We need to have more discussion on it, but when I was up at the state legislature up there were many, many medical doctors that talked to the Republican caucus and indicated there are not instances where an abortion of a viable life will save the life of the mother. let's talk about it more, but it was very convincing what they said.
So there's a potential that you would allow some exceptions to abortion?
We will talk about it more. I am happy to talk about it more, but what I have learned, what I have gleaned, I am firmly convinced that there are no situations where a life of a mother is impacted or affected or saved by an abortion. And right now we're using abortion as a form of birth control, which is completely inappropriate when there's so much birth control available out there and it's free.
Okay, thank you. Mr. O'Day, you've said that a woman should be able to have an abortion early in her pregnancy, but you don't support late-term abortions. So specifically, what do you define as a late-term abortion and what do you define as an early-term abortion? I'm also hoping you can answer when you believe that life begins.
Well, look, first off, I want to compliment Ron. That was a lot of double talk. You've changed, you flip-flopped again, and now I guess I'm hearing you might flip-flop one more time, so you're at least consistent. I've been consistent. I've said that this bill that Pelosi, or that Schumer and Jared Polis have put through is reckless. Late-term abortion, I would vote against that every day. When we're talking about abortion, though, I would not support taxation. I would not support religious institutions being forced to do something that they don't want to do. I would support parental notification. Those were my must-haves. But I do not support a total ban, and I've been consistent about that. I'll also tell you that if you can't mandate anything, if you mandate it, it just means that it's going to go somewhere else and we're not going to know about it. And it's going to put a lot of young ladies in very unsafe predicament. So in order to fix abortion here in the United States, my belief is we need to do more with adoption. It's a deeply personal issue for me. I was adopted at birth by a loving family. I believe that my brave biological mother did the right thing, and I'm very thankful to her. And we need to make tax concessions, if we can, for adoption. We need to make that easier in the United States. That's how you get rid of abortion.
I want to follow up, though. I don't think I heard you answer the specific question about what you define early-term abortion, what you define as a late-term abortion.
Look, I think it has something to do with viability, but that's the debate. And that debate can be had by each state and where they're at. I don't believe that I get to weigh in on that. That's not my decision.
Well, as a U.S. Senator, you might have a chance to weigh in on that. I know you said that you want to run your campaign, not on social issues, but as a U.S. Senator, there will be social issues that you have to take a vote on. So on this one, one more chance to how do you define
We'll look at the facts and we'll determine it when the vote comes up. There's a lot that goes into this legislation. I've already told you exactly where I would be. No tax dollars, no religious institutions, and making sure that we have a parental consent. And so I'm going to land right there.
Okay. Mr. Hanks, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Sure. I think the bottom line for the Republican voters in this primary is I am pro-life, my opponent is not. The misrepresentation or the lies that we hear are easily refuted at hanksforcolorado.com. I fought that heinous abortion bill on the floor of the House in this last session for over 24 hours. It's pretty obvious where I stand on this. I am pro-life, Joe's not, period.
Mr. O'Day.
Well, that's this time. The facts are really clear on therealronhanks.com. You can go to the website and you can see exactly what the record is, and I'll let it speak for itself.
All right, when we come back, where the candidates stand on one of the most divisive issues right now for Republicans. We'll be right back. Welcome to this campaign 2022 Senate primary debate. Well, since President Trump's loss in 2020, election security has emerged as a big issue for many Republicans. Mr. Representative Hanks, I want to start with you for this question. You say Donald Trump was the real winner in 2020 and the election was fraudulent. Even the president's own attorney general, deputy AG, campaign manager, campaign attorney, data expert, his own daughter have said otherwise. My question for you is, will you accept the results of this primary election?
Well, we obviously have to see what we will see here. But fundamentally, let me tell you, I am a 32-year military veteran. Most of my time was with high security clearances, working at National Security Agency, working at cyber Security Command. I have a little bit of background in the idea of what security means with regard to software and hardware. At National Security Agency, we had a very, very tight supply chain of custody control over our systems. Our election systems do not, categorically do not. They are built in China using foreign workers, using equipment and hardware that is off of the shelf and is not secure in any national security sense of the word. It ought to be. So, problem is we're using the same systems again in 2022. We used them in 2021. By the way, the Dominion systems in Colorado were not certified to the 2002 standards that they were required to be. That's why I ran a lawsuit against our corrupt Secretary of State in order to get an audit of our elections in 2020, and it happened again in 2021. Those systems were still not certified to the 2002 standards. And when you think about it, Sean, it is a very low threshold to have a 2002 standard in 2020. 18 years later, we all have seen what has advanced in technology, in our cell phones, in our laptops in 20 years. So they can't even keep that standard and that minimum certification. So we have concerns. I had 2 election integrity bills on the floor of the House. One of them was to eliminate these electronic voting systems. We're still in it. We're trying injunctions, but that's where we are right now. We'll see what happens.
So you don't buy it? All the AG, deputy AG, campaign manager, all of them aren't accurate with this.
I would recommend to you and the audience 2,000 Mules. Look at the visual evidence of what exactly happened there. And you know, you don't need fraud across the nation. You need it in specific spots. We saw that in 5 states in 2020. And in fact, you saw it, Sean, where they kicked the poll watchers out, wallpapered up the windows, and then Biden was declared the winner. Even the common sense test, the smell test, is pretty obvious on that one.
I want a quick follow-up. You attended the Stop the Steal rally in Washington on January 6th, but
I did.
You said you did not enter the U.S. Capitol. How close did you get?
They were 2 separate events. The Stop the Steal rally
Right.
was down between the White House and the Washington Monument. We got there about 6:30. We stood there for 7 hours. There was a second event on the east side of the Capitol and between the Capitol and the Supreme Court building. So we made our way up there. It's 1.5 miles. By the time we got there, there's already people scurrying up the scaffolding. As far as how close I got to this, I'm a physical and physical protection and personnel security expert. Worst force security force work I've ever seen in my career. I kept looking at the police, looking for some kind of guidance as to where they wanted us to go. Crowd control, there was none. But I will tell you, Sean, it was very ill-advised for anybody to go into the Capitol. I wouldn't even go up the steps. They had no control over it, but I wouldn't go up the steps.
So you got to the steps, but
To the
didn't
steps.
go up. Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. O'Day, you do not question the 2020 results, but when it comes to elections, do you support federal legislation to set consistent voting standards in all 50 states, and what would that look like? Is Colorado the gold standard?
Look, I've been very clear about my stance. Biden's our president. He's lousy. He's doing a really terrible job. Bennett votes with him 100% of the time, and he's a problem. We need to get him out of there. But I've also been clear that, you know, our elections are run here locally. They do a pretty good job. I don't think you can ever say that there's never any little bit of fraud. Somebody might vote. I get that, but not enough to turn an election. And I believe that those elections need to stay here with our locals. Bennett and Hickenlooper both voted on a bill, H.R. 2, I believe is what it was, to federalize our elections. We don't need Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi running our elections. We've got enough issues. They're doing a pretty good job here in Colorado. I'd like to leave it with the locals. They're the ones that should be in charge of that.
Okay. 30-second rebuttal.
Sure. I put in 2 pieces of legislation to fix what we have here. It is a state legislator's role, and I think we have significant problems here in Colorado. I think we ought to scrub the voter rolls clean and start over. We should stop using the ERIC system And frankly, the mail-in ballots is a big problem. We ought to drop them off, and it ought to be on an election day. And these types of fixes will make it much more secure.
You have anything to add?
Yeah, this is why Democrats are putting so much money into this race from back east, is because they want to have Ron be the one elected. It's Schumer's money, and they want to have him having this debate all summer with Michael Bennet, talking about elections that are stolen, instead of talking about what's really important to working Americans here in Colorado, which is the price of gas. It's inflation every time we turn around. It's 30% on our grocery bills. And those are the arguments I'm going to take to Michael Bennet here as we get on this summer. That's what's important to working Americans.
Jesse?
So our next question has to do with the war in Ukraine, and both of you have said that you don't support American troops on the ground in Ukraine, but do you support congressional and military aid to Ukraine to help the Ukrainians fight the Russians? And if so, how much and for how long? Mr. O'Day, first question. It goes to you.
So they passed a bill, I think it's $40 billion worth of help to Ukraine. I thought that was excessive. I thought Rand Paul was on the right track there. He wanted oversight in the bill. We can see what happened in Afghanistan when you don't have any oversight. That should be an example to Coloradans and why we would have oversight. I don't believe in boots on the ground there for the United States. I believe NATO should be doing their job. But I also believe Putin's a thug. I believe he's a bully. He's going to continue to push Europe. He's going to continue to push America until somebody stops him in his tracks. And that's why I think it is important that we do back Ukrainians. They're fighting tough for their own freedom. We need to give them what they need. But I thought that bill was excessive. I wouldn't have voted for that bill. We need to make sure that we stop Putin here. If he gets away with this, then he's going to come into a NATO nation next, and we're going to end up with a world war. And that's why we need to get behind the Ukrainians.
So if $40 billion is too much, and in your first year as a senator, a $10 billion aid bill comes up, would you vote for that, or do you have a number in mind?
Well, it would have to see what exactly is in it. The reason that we're sending this money is because Biden was asleep at the wheel. He saw this buildup, Russian troops around Ukraine. He did absolutely nothing until after they entered Ukraine. And that's a problem. He should have taken a lot of those assets that got left in Afghanistan that we abandoned there and gave to the Taliban. Why weren't those moved into Ukraine? That's the question I would be asking.
Mr. Hanks.
Yeah, we have a big problem. First off, this is a failure of leadership. Joe Biden was disgraceful in his efforts in Afghanistan, and it begot us the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Had Trump been there, I don't think Putin would have done this. But we should not be selling weapons to the Ukraine at this time, to the Ukrainians. The reason is we have to have a relationship with Russia in the years and decades to come. And frankly, the time to give them those weapons was in advance of any kind of invasion by the Soviets, by the Russians. What we have now is the opportunity for Putin to become very distressed, and he's not well, by the way, and we have to start looking at who is going to be the next Russian leader. And when we sell $40 billion worth of arms and then another $1 billion more recently, we are angering the Russian people that we ought to be working to bring into the Western fold and away from China in the decades ahead. So I guess what I'm trying to convey here is Biden's made a horrible mistake. He's been wrong on almost every foreign policy issue since he's been in the Senate. His own party makes fun of him about this. But Putin does not have to take this kind of embarrassment and this kind of beating from the United States. ISIS and Al-Qaeda did, but Putin has ways to fight back. And it could be cyber, it could be sea lane interdiction of our supplies. It's a serious problem. We should have given those weapons well in advance of the Russian invasion.
So you would vote against a congressional bill to offer, financial aid and weapons. I believe the U.S. is giving Ukraine weapons, not selling them. So if that bill came up, how would you vote?
No, they are selling them as well. And you can see the daily and the monthly arms list of what we're offering: anti-aircraft, anti-tank. And I wanted to make that point. Whatever the numbers are, they're sketchy coming out of there, but let's say it's 30,000 Russians have been killed by American arms sold after the invasion started. That's 30,000 Russian families that are going to be anti-American for generations to come. It did not have to come to this. It was a horrible, horrible national security blunder by Joe Biden.
And how would you vote on a congressional aid?
I'd vote no on it at this point. There are probably ways to get weapons into Ukraine, but it isn't by putting them on the front page of the newspaper. You're just buying problems for the American people.
Mr. O'Day, I want to offer you a chance to
Well, I think we need to recognize evil. This is evil. What Putin is doing to the Ukrainian people is evil. And the only way to respond to evil is strength. We have to show strength. This is part of the reason that Nazi Germany got so far along in their attempt to take over the world. We didn't have people stepping up. We've got a great Ukrainian population that's fighting for their freedom. I believe we need to get them what they need.
Representative Hanks, anything to add?
No, it's a situation that did not have to happen. And frankly, now Sweden and Finland want membership into NATO. They picked a bad time to do it. They had decades to do it. We have to be a little cautious here. This is a nuclear superpower. And I have, by the way, escorted Russian diplomats around to our nuclear facilities. We have, and they've got the same things. They have actually more weapons than we have. We have to be respectful of an adversary such as Russia. We can't call him a punk like Joe has done in previous events. We have to be extremely diplomatic and very, very, very deliberate in what we do.
Okay, we need to take a break right now. When we come back, we're going to press the candidates on a couple issues that have not come up in the Republican-sponsored debates. Welcome back again to this Campaign 2022 Senate primary debate. Jesse, you've got our next question.
Our next question has to do with climate change, and Mr. O'Day, this will go to you. It's a multi-part question. You've acknowledged that climate change is happening and that humans contribute to it, but do you support efforts to move away from a fossil fuel-based energy system? And if so, how do you see that happening? Would there be subsidies potentially for renewables?
Look, I've been very vocal that the policies that are in place right now are crushing working Americans. We've got to do more to get a sustainable energy source, and that means we need to, if we're going to move away from fossil fuels, and I don't know that we're going to in the next 100 years, a lot of things are made with fossil fuels. If we are going to move away, we've got to create a system where we make sure that we have the energy available that we need before we move away from fossil fuels. That's what's driving the price of gasoline to $5, $6 a gallon, is because we don't have a good energy policy in mind. We're not doing this over the course of enough time. We have to do it with the pace that allows demand to stay even with supply. That's the only way this works. I've been an advocate for nuclear. I've been an advocate for geothermal. I've been an advocate for hydrogen. There's a lot of fuels out there, windmill, solar, all good. But we've got to have enough energy to solve what we need to solve here in the United States. We can't just turn the switch off and expect people to still be able to power their homes. We're hearing now rumors of brownouts that might come to Colorado this year. That's because we don't have good, consistent policy. If we're going to restore oil and gas, it's got to be about making that a decision that businesses can depend on. We can't have a fluctuating policy that changes every time we have a new administration. They have to be able to invest in order to get this fuel out of the ground. Colorado has the cleanest gas molecule in the world. We should be supplying that around the nation and put more Coloradans back to work here.
So if there's not the ability to go to renewable energy future right now, how can Congress and should Congress help make that transition happen?
Well, I believe the transition needs to happen through innovation. It needs to happen through hard work, the capital society that we have here in the United States. Let the businesses get out of their way, let them be innovative, let them compete, and soon we'll see our energy bills go down. That's how you get that done.
How about subsidies for renewables similar to the ones that are offered to the oil and gas industry?
I believe that we need to do whatever we need to do to make sure that we have good energy here in the United States. I'm not an advocate for subsidies. We need to get government out of our business, but we need to get out of their way. It's the regulations that are costing Americans right now. They got more red tape here than anywhere else in the world. Why would we go and solicit from Venezuela, where they don't have any regulations, for oil to be imported here? Not to mention the cost of emissions just transporting it here. That makes absolutely no sense to me.
Okay. Representative Hanks, you say that climate change is not a real issue, and that it's, quote, called weather. Can you explain your position, which runs contrary to scientific consensus?
Well, I don't think it does run contrary to scientific consensus. I think it's still very much an argument out there. And frankly, we need oil and gas, and we need coal, and we need nuclear. We need all of those to bring it manufacturing back to this country. And I believe that is one of the major issues that Americans and Coloradans are worried about, because it is an inflationary pressure when you do not have supplies of what we need in this country and the shelves are bare. It obviously raises prices. So we need an entire revamp of our energy program. I would not support subsidies for wind and solar, but I am not opposed to wind and solar. They simply need to stand on their own. I would not advocate for subsidies for anything, actually, but the regulation on the nuclear industry, and my dad was in the nuclear industry for 25 years, made nuclear so difficult that most of those plants were converted from nuclear plants to coal turbines, or gas turbines, excuse me. And the coal industry is facing the same thing. We're blessed with hundreds of years of clean coal supplies in this country, in the American West. And frankly, I trust American science and blue-collar America to extract it and our oil and gas in an environmentally conscientious way. And we should never have a brownout or an energy shortage in this country. And we should always be able to manufacture in this country. And by the way, that's good paying jobs for Americans. And that ought to be a priority here. That improves our economy. And it all comes down to energy.
So you oppose all efforts to reduce emissions or curb greenhouse gases?
Well, I think that's inaccurate too. It's a mischaracterization. I think the vehicle emissions from the 70s versus what they are now is generally a good thing, but I think we could have allowed the automotive industry to do that itself rather than through the government mandates. I think, again, it's a public priority to have clean air, clean water, and clean emissions from our vehicles, and the market will bring that.
Mr. Ed, I give you a chance to offer.
Sure, I think Ron's right there. When we get government out of the way, we give goals to our manufacturer on what we want to accomplish, they seem to be able to accomplish it. If you look at what fracking has done to clean up gas here in the United States and make it the cleanest molecule, that's why. That was innovation from the oil and gas people. We need to get government out of our way.
Mr. Hanks?
Well, and I'll double down on my endorsement of the fracking industry. I fracked in North Dakota. We used to put down these canvas liners under the trucks and drive over them, and if there was ever a spill, we'd clean it up. I mean, blue-collar America is going to get us out of the mess that Biden has put us in. We have to open up our oil and gas fields again, and we can do it with the stroke of a pen. Inflation drops in a matter of months.
Okay, our next topic is health care. Representative Hanks, would you vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare? And if so, what would you replace it with? And would that include guaranteed coverage for pre-existing conditions?
I guess I'm a bit of a romantic in the idea that I wish health care was between a patient and their doctor, and there was no government involvement in it whatsoever, no gatekeeper. And I think that we are in a world now that, yeah, we very much ought to eliminate Obamacare. And again, that's the whole reason I ran in 2010. I put my military career on hold because Obamacare was being jammed down our throats. We all remember the temerity of Pelosi to say, we're going to pass the bill and then you'll find out what's in it. Well, that didn't sit well with me. It didn't sit well with a lot of Americans. So I worked to fight against it. I would overturn it now. We were within one vote had John McCain gone in the direction he said he was going to, and that's the risk you run of electing soft Republicans. And we had the opportunity to overturn it some years back.
Would you replace it with anything or no?
At this point, I think good old-fashioned health care is what we ought to go to. And when I was in the House over here, they had a bill out there to fine hospitals $10,000 a day that were inadequately staffed. Now, that's the government for you. What is that going to gain? What hospital does not want to have appropriate staffing, and who's it going to destroy except, and first and foremost, rural hospitals? I mean, this is government getting in the way and ruining health care. We have 13 counties in Colorado that don't have hospitals now. At $10,000 a day fines for being inadequately staffed, we're going to have more counties that don't have health care. That's not where the government ought to be. When the government gets involved in something, it makes it worse. And so I would say let's get as close to family doctor and patient relationship as we can.
Mr. O'Day, repeal Obamacare, replace it with anything?
Well, I think that during the Trump administration, they did a really good job of getting rid of a lot of the things in Obamacare that were intolerable. They got rid of the mandates, they got rid of the Cadillac tax. There was a lot of things that are in there. There's the pre-existing condition, that needs to be a priority for Americans. Americans need to know that they can get health care despite where they move. If we want to fix health care here in the United States, we got to get big government out of the way again. It's the same with every industry that we look at. We need the innovation, we need competitiveness, and we need more choices for our health care. We've got so many regulations around our health care right now that we can't compete. We can't allow these really good companies to use their innovation to compete for our business. I know the minute you make more healthcare available to businesses, it's going to drive the costs down. It works on everything. It's called capitalism. Get government out of the way. And that's where I am.
So repeal Obamacare.
I would not repeal Obamacare.
Okay.
Right now, the piece that's left in there is we need to leave it alone. But what we need to add to it, we need to make sure that we get government out of the way again. This is about innovation. This is about making sure we have more choice, making sure we're more competitive. A lot of those things that were bad about Obamacare have gone away. So I'm not advocating either way. What we need to do is improve our healthcare system here, and that's how we do it.
Representative Hanks, rebuttal.
Yeah. My counter is that the whole reason government is involved in healthcare in the first place was because of the wage and price controls during the Great Depression. They put controls on the amount that companies could hire employees for. So then they ended up adding health care benefits. It seems to me that was government 80 years ago starting the problem. That was the cause of it. I think people ought to be able to get insurance on their own outside of their business and their employment. I think it's a better model.
Mr. O'Day, any
Look,
rebuttal?
I've spent the last 35 years with a business that buys health care for my employees each and every year. And the minute that Obamacare came online, it shot our premiums up by almost $400 for a family here in Colorado. So there's things in there that they got rid of. I'm very glad that they did, but we need to make sure we have health care available for our employees. I want the free market to reign. I want to be able to buy what I need for my employees and make those decisions for my employees and not have government mandates in the way.
All right. We're going to take another break right now, and when we come back, the candidates get to quiz each other. Welcome back again to this Campaign 2022 Senate primary debate between Republican candidates, Representative Ron Hanks and Mr. Joe O'Day. It is time now for our lightning round, and for these questions, I'd like you to keep your answers to about 30 seconds. Our first question, is former President Trump to blame, at least in part, for the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol? And Representative Hanks?
No.
Mr. O'Day?
No, but I believe he could have done a lot more to slow that process down. I was a little disappointed to see him go 3 and some hours before he told his people to stand down.
Would you support Donald Trump if he runs for president in 2024, or would you like someone else to be the Republican nominee, Mr. O'Day?
Look, there's a lot of really good candidates that can serve an 8-year term. I really like DeSantis. I like some of the other Republicans that are coming through. But if Donald Trump happens to be the Republican nominee, then I definitely won't vote for Biden or Pelosi, so that's where I'd be.
Representative Hanks?
It's his decision. If he were to run, I would support him. I also would support Ted Cruz or DeSantis.
If you're willing to share, who are you voting for Republican Secretary of State in that primary? Representative Hanks?
Yeah, at this point, I'll leave that private.
Okay. Mr. O'Day?
I'm supporting Pam Anderson, and I have since I started. I donated to her campaign. She's going to be a strong candidate for the Secretary of State.
Jesse?
Do you support the Senate gun legislation framework that includes provisions like closing the boyfriend loophole, Mr. O'Day?
Well, you know, it's a long ways from legislation. You have to see what's in a bill before you can pass it. But that boyfriend deal, that's a mystery to me. If somebody threatens my daughter, if somebody threatens someone, put them in jail. I mean, take them off the street. If they make a violent act, lock them up. Now they're a felon. Now they can't get a gun. We've got plenty of laws in place already.
I'm going to need a repeat. I couldn't hear a word.
Yeah, do you support the Senate gun legislation framework that includes provisions like closing the boyfriend loophole?
The U.S. Senate one
Yes.
that hasn't been drafted yet?
No,
Is that
there
the
is
one?
a framework that has been released.
Yeah, at this point, no. The red flag law that has not been drafted, that 11 senators from the Republican Party have signed on to, bad idea. I don't know what they're thinking, and I got to tell you, the American people had better push back on those 11 senators because they're selling us out. That's what you get when you elect a soft Republican.
And this one's for you, Representative Hanks. Would you have voted for the roughly $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that was signed into law last year?
No, it was pork, and it was a bad idea. It was outside of the budget. Our budget system isn't even properly regulated now by the constraints of the legislative branch. So that was above and beyond. It's inflationary.
Mr. O'Day?
No, it's a highway tax fund. Most of those dollars that are in there are funded with our dollars they collected here in Colorado for a federal excise tax on gasoline. We need to do some research, and that money is designated to go to infrastructure. That's just where it went. There was 19 Republicans that supported that bill. Donald Trump ran on double that just 4 years ago. He wanted to double the infrastructure because he knew you got to fix the leaks in our roof.
So to confirm, you would vote for that? Would have voted for that bill?
Yes, I would.
Okay, Mr. O'Day, this question is for you. Would you ever vote to get rid of the filibuster in the Senate?
No, I would not.
Representative Hanks?
No.
Okay, Representative Hanks, this is for you. Do you support a pathway to citizenship for the millions of people living in the U.S. illegally?
Not at this point anymore. I'll tell you, that used to be an idea that was debated, but no, we have let way too many people in, and now we have the problem of gathering them up and doing a deportation.
Mr. O'Day?
Look, we got to start with closing this border. The border's leaking like a sieve right now. We got fentanyl coming at us, record amounts. We've got human trafficking. We've got cartels coming up into our cities right now and committing crimes. We've got to get our border shored up. At the same time, we need some kind of process in place for the dreamers. They should be allowed to stay here. And then as all those other people that are here illegally, I don't see how you're going to get a bus that's big enough to ship them all back. They need to get in line. They need to go through a process. We can't just let them in. That's not right.
So you do support a pathway to citizenship for those who are here legally?
Look, they need to get in line just like everybody else.
Okay.
All right, well, we are going to leave the final question up to the two of you. We flipped a coin, and Mr. O'Day, your question for your opponent.
Sure. So just recently, 2 weeks ago, we've seen record dollars come into this primary race from Schumer and the Democratic Party out of Washington. Some are estimating they're going to spend north of $10 million to make sure that I'm not the candidate here that makes it through this primary. Why? Why is because, Ron, you're a flip-flopping politician from California. You've come here, you've changed your stance on a lot of issues. It's abortion, You've changed your stance on term limits. You've changed your stance on guns. It's all documented. You can go and look at it. 47 misses in the legislature. You didn't show up for work for committee meetings, and then when you did, you voted for a bill that supported grooming. You voted against a bill that would have prevented teachers from grooming students. You're the only Republican that put that down. I can't understand why. I know my daughter, I would not want a teacher grooming my daughter. They're a person of trust trying to have sex with my daughter, 18 or not. How do you justify all that?
Well, I don't have to, because they're all misrepresentation and lies, either coming directly from you or coming from your campaign.
Let's look at the information. Your voting record is very clear. You missed over 47% of the Energy Committee meetings because you didn't want to be there, or why? I'm going to tell you right now, as a U.S. Senator, I'm going to show up for work. I doubt you will.
Well, this has multi-part answers. Okay, so I am on 3 committees, and most people are on 2 committees, Joe. I got 3 because I called a no confidence vote on soft, squishy rhino Republicans, and which you probably will be one of those should you ever hold any office anywhere. You are to the left of Mitt Romney. So I had 3 committees I had to balance my time with, and the constituent side of the House. But what you may not know about the legislative process is there's first the committee hearing, and then there's second reading on the floor of the House, which is where I put in amendments and where I fought that abortion bill for over 24 hours. And then there's the third reading on the floor of the House and final passage. That's where I ended up putting most of my focus. So that's part 1.
It sounds like a lot of double talk to me. Did you show up for work or not?
It's probably because you don't understand what you're talking about. That's probably why.
Well, please explain to people why you would vote you would vote against making it a criminal offense.
Yeah, please let him ask the question.
Do we have this kind of time?
Yeah, he has the one question, so if you're finished answering, we could...
No, that one's important. And I would tell people to go to hanks4colorado.com, truth and facts, and you will see every misrepresentation and lie by the pay-to-play O'Day campaign here. And that one is clear. I don't expect you're going to understand it, but the problem with SB 21017 is it was a convoluted and poorly worded bill that adds confusion. And of course, it's ridiculous of you to indicate that I would want to put children at risk. But actually, Joe, what we were talking about are kids 18 and over. Now, that is the age of majority. And what that bill did, and this is important, and I'd ask you to pay attention to this, that bill makes 2 separate classes of 18-year-olds. So you're either the age of majority or you're not the age of majority. Now, as far as teachers having relationships with children, reprehensible. With students, even 18 and over, which is what the bill was about, it's grotesque, but it ought to be handled in the employment terms of the contract of the educational institution, not the Colorado.
The only Republican.
Let's
and you'll have a chance
you
in
get
a
your
second.
question
right.
now.
And Representative Hanks, we'll invite you to ask your question.
Sure. Well, Joe, you led me right into it. Your campaign, or you directly, have misrepresented or lied about virtually every part of my record. You've also misrepresented or lied about your endorsement by the NRA. It was not the NRA. So my question is there anything that you would not misrepresent or lie about in order to become a U.S. Senator?
Well, I would just answer that with go to our website, therealronhanks.com. All the documents are on there that people can see to see that you flip-flopped several times. Heard it again today on your abortion stance, flip-flop. I'm the only one sitting here that's been endorsed by the Colorado Shooting Association,
Which
is
not
the
the
NRA here in Colorado.
It is not the official
Go check
state
it out.
chapter.
You can go check it out.
There is no official state chapter
You know
of the
what?
NRA.
You can go
Sean, you
check
got
it
that
out.
wrong,
I'm the
too.
only one.
Yeah.
Only one that's been
I'm
endorsed.
Gun Owners of America.
So I'm the
endorsed
only
by
one.
Gun Owners of America, which is really the preeminent effort. You weren't even there. I mean, that's not even NRA.
You guys
It's an
can let each
embarrassment.
other
Speaks for
answer the
itself.
questions.
Okay.
You've answered?
I've answered my question.
Okay, all right. We'll be right back with closing remarks. Welcome back once again to this Campaign 2022 Senate primary debate between Ron Hanks and Joe Day. Time now for our closing remarks. We flipped a coin ahead of time, and Representative Hanks, you get to go first. 1 minute.
Sure. Thank you all for the opportunity to talk tonight. This is an important primary election. I want to tell you, I went through the assembly process. My opponent did not. I cleared 5 candidates off of the assembly ballot. And I dare say, had my opponent gone through the assembly, we'd be fighting Michael Bennet right now. Instead, he paid his way on, and that's his right. But bottom line, nobody knows where he stands. I'm pro-life, he is not. That's the end of the story on that. I'm Second Amendment, I'm pro-Second Amendment, endorsed by Gun Owners of America. He'll tell you he's endorsed by NRA, he's not. It's the CSSA, different organization altogether. This all comes down to national security. I have 32 years of military experience, all of it in intelligence and national security. We have got to cut the inflation rate, secure the borders, bring manufacturing back, and get our kids educated in a traditional sense. To that end, I would eliminate the U.S. Department of Education. Please go to Hanks for Colorado, check out some of the misrepresentations of my opponent, and I've countered them with the truth. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Mr. O'Day, your 1 minute closing.
Jesse, thanks for having me here today. I appreciate it. I'm born in Colorado, 4th generation, grew up over in southeast Denver, went to Mullen High School, carpenter by trade, chased my lovely wife on up to CSU where I got most of my construction management degree, and I started a business here with nothing. Nothing at all we started with. And we've grown that to over 300 employees. We've employed thousands of good working Coloradans here. I'm ready to take the fight to Michael Bennet. I'm not a flip-flopping politician that's going to bend around the ears of this issue or that issue. I'm going to take the fight to Michael Bennet, and I can win this November. I hope you'll vote for me. I'm excited to be your next U.S. Senator. We've got a lot of work to do here in Colorado, and that starts with making sure that we replace Michael Bennet this year. He's going to go to sleep at night hearing my voice in his head. 30% on your grocery bill, inflation. $5 gas, inflation. $5 gas, inflation. $5 gas, inflation. That's all we're going to talk about, and we're going to make sure that I replace Michael Bennet this year in the U.S. Senate. Thanks again for having me here. I hope you'll vote for Joe O'Day, joeoday.com.
All right. We need to leave it at that. I want to, on behalf of both Jesse and myself, thank you both for being here, and thank you all for joining us. This has been a CBS 4 Colorado Sun Campaign 2022 debate.